I think it's because of exactly that I pay so much attention to the human side of data and AI. I wrote 2 books about it, right? Humanizing Data Strategy and Humanizing AI Strategy over the last 3 years.
Welcome to It's About Data, episode 85. Our guest is Tiankai Feng of Thoughtworks. We're discussing his recent books on humanizing data strategy and humanizing AI strategy. Tiankai, welcome to the show. It's really great to have you here.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for having me. Yeah.
And actually, it's a really interesting sort of it's really serendipity. How we came across each other, because you actually discovered me on LinkedIn, and for me, it's usually the other way around when I scout for victims on this podcast.
I see. So I offered myself as a victim, basically. Yeah, no, I'm happy to do that.
Yeah, but you willingly submitted yourself there. But anyway, I was very impressed, and you've also worked with a lot of my colleagues over at Bark. As I mentioned, you were going to be having Kevin Petrie on next week to review results of study that he's conducted with Merv. Of course, by the time all this airs, the whole temporal order of this may be kind of jumbled out.
The space-time continuum will be disrupted.
Exactly. But Tiankai, you're director of data and AI strategy for Thoughtworks. Tell us about what that is, and kind of how you've basically gotten very much into basically looking at the human side of AI, even going as far as writing children's books.
Yes, indeed. Yeah. So basically, I work as a director for data and AI strategy, right? And under strategy, we really mean the strategic problems and challenges that our clients have. Okay. And that means including governance, for example. That includes also operating models and business processes. That includes also transformation roadmaps and choosing the right use cases to implement data and AI products and AI initiatives and these kind of things. So basically, how to connect real data and AI initiatives to business value. And that sounds very fluffy, but of course, in the weeds of it, it's a lot of talking and working with leaders and really making the right decisions and convincing them to work in the same way.
Yeah. I mean, anyone who's worked on the engineering side as a consultant like me knows that the fluffy stuff is in some ways the hardest stuff, right?
And that is indeed true, because it's so fluffy, probably even.
Yeah, no, precisely. I mean, the people who fund your initiatives, for example, they're not generally not engineers, and you need to explain to them why it's important and also come up with a strategy to make it important. And that is not always easy.
Exactly. And I think it's because of exactly that I pay so much attention to the human side of data and AI. I wrote 2 books about it, right? Humanizing Data Strategy and Humanizing AI Strategy over the last 3 years. And as Tony just said, I just released a children's book last week as of this recording. Robbie Just Wants to Help, which is basically about AI literacy for the next generation. I wrote it with my 2 kids actually as the main characters of it. So I have a little bit of a personal fulfillment there as well, of being a cool dad that wrote a book about the kids as well. But that is what I really care about, because I realized that most of the challenges and failures that we have in technology are rooted in human factors, right? It's people not understanding, not talking to each other, making bad decisions, and then technology is usually blamed for it. But if there was a little bit more interaction and understanding among the human beings first, then we wouldn't have made that bad choice, indeed, right? So that is kind of where I'm always coming from.
So let me ask you the 100,000-foot question. So what do you mean when you say humanizing AI? Because this is really the whole theme of your research.
I understand. Also, only after releasing the book, I realized that there's so many interpretations of it, because it was so clear to me. But I really mean to build AI around human beings and putting the human in the center when we make decisions around AI, right? And not making AI feel and sound more human. Not that part of it. The other side of it, where we want to focus on AI from people for people, and that actually it does provide a benefit for humanity as a whole as well, right? That is kind of where I'm coming from with humanizing.
Yeah, because often the pitch is just the opposite, right? When you talk about trying to make sort of anthropomorphize AI, we're talking about replacing human beings. And so this, from my perspective, is a much better emphasis.
Yes, absolutely.
Right. Well, let's sort of cut to the chase here, which is that what you say, and things. I think the timeliness of this discussion is really quite striking. Given that, of course, that now this has really seeped into the general consciousness, and the fact is that we have people in positions of power, or I should say, like the captains of industry that are saying that they're saying openly, we're going to be replacing people with AI. In some cases, they're occasionally walking those back, their statements slightly. You see, basically, places like at Meta where we're under the guise of we're trying to do research to understand how humans work. We're going to record every keystroke. This has some really Orwellian
Scary
overtones.
stuff.
Yeah.
You have basically the behavior of folks like like Sam Altman, and Elon Musk, who were basically the truth is just is inconvenient, and so therefore there is really a lot of basically fear and loathing, basically to I guess quote Hunter S. Thompson. That's a really obscure 1960s reference. About AI right now. I mean, it's and it's getting to the point where it's even becoming a political issue. So basically, what do you have? I mean, if I'm listening to you talk, I remember you giving the definition of an optimist
Yeah.
and kind of having some fun with that. But in a way, I see you as being a little, as opposed to you're trying to come. I think you're trying to counteract the doom scrolling about AI at this point. Would that be a fair assessment?
Absolutely. I can fully agree to that. Yes, that sounds about right.
But talk to us a little bit more in terms of like how we as humans really need to shape this.
Yes, I think so. So basically, what I'm thinking is, right, that when the hype around AI started, it was all about, wow, AI can really do a lot of things. And a lot of the repetitive, tedious things that human beings had to do can finally be outsourced to technology, right? It felt like now it's even like a low accessibility threshold because now you can just talk to AI. You don't even need to code. So you kind of just talk to it and it does stuff for you. And in a way, it got really skewed over time, though, right? Because as you mentioned, a lot of companies are using AI either as an excuse or a real reason to lay off people because they say now that machines can do stuff, we basically can replace a lot of people with it. But I think that entire narrative of saying so absolute statements like AI replacing people as a whole is the wrong one, right? Because what we're actually replacing are tasks and not real living mechanisms or living organisms, right? In a way. And the biggest difference that I keep on thinking about and talking about is as well that when we think about humans and what they do at work, right, there's a lot of the behavior and actually putting output and getting output out there, right? And that is all good. But that is all of the explicit knowledge that happens, right? You document, you create stuff, and you let people see what that is. But a lot in our heads happens implicitly that we sometimes don't even know ourselves how to articulate it, right? We just kind of have those thought processes and our neurons are kind of just connected and we come up with things and we have these associations. And that is a part that since we don't know how to explicitly articulate it, we would never also put it down anywhere, right? And that is what makes us really inherently human, though, right? So that is also why when we hear about news that call centers are being replaced by chatbots, customer service is being replaced by chatbots and LLMs and whatnot, that those things usually fail because all that instinct and then empathy and all of that implicit knowledge and feelings that we have, how we interact with human beings, is lost because that's not what machines are being trained with, basically, right? And that is where I think I see the biggest gap is, right? That we think about only the tasks and output part of human beings when we replace them, but not about the thought process and actually what goes into doing the right things as well.
Well, I think a lot of the problems with technology sort of replacing human relationships go back to well before 2022, well before ChatGPT took off. So, for example, social media, instead of even interacting with your friends on social media, you can interact with promoted or auto-generated content because it's more convenient, right? You could just be on your phone and you don't have to bother actually connecting with other people. How do we build more human connections and actual human relationships at work in the context of all this new technology, especially AI?
That is so true. I mean, in a way, right? The simple answer to it is we have to just intentionally do it again, right? Because we got so used to hacking our productivity and showing ourselves in the best way possible on social media that all the authenticity and the human critical thinking got lost on the way, right? In a way, we now find the easy way and we think that being productive equals us being well perceived. But in actuality, it's the opposite, right? And we see that with how a lot of people see influencers on social media and what kind of image they have, right? There was even this Harvard Business Review about work slop recently, right? Where they basically said that, right, if you get work slop from your colleagues, then you see them as less competent, less trustworthy, and less collaborative. And that is something that we don't openly talk about enough, right? Because in that moment, that person is very happy they saved 10 minutes of writing that email themselves and let an LLM do it. But then afterwards, people just see that person a little less. That is not great, right? And that is where human connection really got lost in that.
Right. I have two more questions, and I'll ask them separately. One will be at the very end, which I'll use as our little stinker here. But yeah, just giving you a heads up. But it's actually kind of related to the question I'm going to ask right now, which is one of the points that you're making in your recent TEDx talk in Nuremberg, was that how do we basically get essentially AI to become more than what, in my terms, the Rain Man. In other words, like with machine learning and all our models, we've been teaching it on past, behavior, which leads to, as you say, what you call more incremental creativity. Which incremental can help, but the things but you then talk about what's really been key to human progress is breakthrough creativity. And so, how do we really? I mean, how do we really accomplish this in training our models when we're training it on basically on patterns that have already been there? I mean, how do we pull off something like that? Or is that something that we really should not expect AI to be able to do?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think, right, when we think about the overall purpose of AI, that it's always optimizing against goals, right? And the thing about it is then that if it's always optimized against goals, it's always in a converging mode, right? It gets a lot of input and converges towards the optimum of the output and whatever we ask AI to do. But what I call the disruptive creativity and the irrational part of humanity is what is not goal oriented, right? Because all the surreal things, let's say irrational things that we come up with, usually don't have a clear goal in the beginning, right? We just kind of think of these things. It was like, what if that, right? And what about that? And so in a way, machines could not even do that because on their own, they would not be able to even know to think out of the box when all they're being trained with is to focus on the box and be really the best in the box possible, right? So I don't know if we should or can even train machines to do that. But even the opposite, we as human beings should never stop losing that skill to be irrational and be original.
Yeah.
Because if everything is optimized against goals and we let machines then only learn from machine output in the future and we don't have any new input anymore for the world, then we all know that it's like a photocopy of the photocopy, right? The quality significantly decreases. So not even AI is going to be that reliable anymore. So it actually needs us to still produce human original output so we can even keep AI alive and make it usable for us.
So here's another question along the lines of humanizing AI and making it more supportive of human goals and human values, alignment in the industry. What guardrails do we need?
Yeah, that's a really big question. I think overall, what every individual should see as a responsibility is to, when they see things, they should also flag them and they should provide feedback that things are not working. Or if they're worried about things going wrong, either with malicious actors or accidentally things going wrong, not to keep it to themselves, but really actively say it out loud and talk to the right people about it. Because that's something where otherwise, if we don't talk about it openly, things can happen on much bigger scale because no one actually was able to exchange about it and prevent it. And guardrails can be in many ways, right? I mean, when we're technically speaking about input filters and output filters and all these things, but they are also only based on what we in the moment can anticipate as well, right? And this is the thing where, again, the malicious part of human beings comes in. If they irrationally come up with a new way of being malicious, right? And no one had considered that before, then we can only reactively, again, protect ourselves against it. So in a way, I think we have to just really stay alert and be vocal about things and really evolve guardrails over time to make it
right. Anyway, so now as promised or threatened, I'm now going to drop the stinker here, but it's really related to that last question in terms of what's productive to have in the conversation. And the question I ask is, are we doing ourselves any favors by talking about artificial general intelligence, AGI?
So, I think two sides of the coin. I think why it's good, it's because it's good to have like this aspiration, right? And to think that machines can be really that powerful to even be really creating that same cognitive skills as human beings can and be even better, maybe, right, than human beings. And us working on innovation to actually make that happen is really fascinating, right? Like, do we actually get there, and what happens when we get there? On the other side, again, I think it's a little bit too simplistic to think about what it means in relationship to human beings. Because as we just established, right, I think cognitively and all these kind of cognitive skills, sure, I think machines might be able to do that much more directly and optimized in a way. But all that emotional part of it all, the emotional intelligence part of it all, will always be merely an imitation, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
that emotional interaction and how we know things between the lines and how we sense about other people's feelings and how they are reacting in the moment, that is something that it will always be just a copy of, because it's only trained by reactions and behavior, not by what happens in our brains. And this is where I'm a little bit more hesitant about thinking what AGI can do, because if AGI actually becomes that big, then it's as smart as human beings, but not having the emotional basis of it, then that's a recipe for disaster too,
Yeah.
right? So that's my overall thing about it.
You've really fed my whole argument about the fact that I believe that AGI is a non-productive discussion, because the fact is that you can't. I mean, in my view, and I think this has to and I'm sure it sort of correlates with what you're talking about, humanizing AI, is that I think we have to have realistic expectations. And the fact is that I mean, I keep thinking back to that Joaquin Phoenix movie, Her, uh, and I
Right.
mean, do we really want that?
Right.
And the other part also, and at least we could have this part of discussion in another episode, but is this something we should really be aspiring to have? Basically, to have intelligence that we think is basically has the same sort of sentience as humans. And as I said, I'm kind of a cynic on that. Matt, anything you want to finish up with?
I think I want to have another conversation another time, because the things I want to
Yeah.
mention would take us another 20 minutes to talk
Absolutely.
about. So
We'd love
this
to
was
have
a
you
great
back.
episode. Yeah,
Yes. I'm in. Yes.
I'll tell you after the show, and then we can prep for another discussion down the
Exactly.
line.
And maybe we'll get it right this time.
Maybe. Well, thank you, Tiankai. It was so great
Thanks,
to have
CJ.
you here.
Thanks so much for having me. Thanks.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Talk to you later.